I raised my glass, ready to give a simple Christmas toast, when my daughter-in-law rolled her eyes and muttered, "Of course she bought the cheapest wine she could find." Everyone heard it. My hand trembled as I lowered the glass, my cheeks burning. For a second, I thought I'd break down right there in front of my grandbabies. But then the doorbell rang, and the delivery guy stepped inside, struggling to carry in all the gifts I had secretly ordered for the family. Until that knock, the house on Collier Avenue smelled like cinnamon and honey-baked ham, the kind of scent that gets into your sweater and makes you feel hugged. My brother Leon was at the end of the table cracking jokes. My granddaughter Zuri kept poking the marshmallows on the sweet potatoes, and my son Marcus, my only child, was trying to keep the peace between his wife, Lila, and me. It was our first Christmas all together in my new place in Decatur, the little 2-bedroom I bought after 30 years working front desk at Grady. I had polished the thrifted silver, ironed the red tablecloth, and stacked plates from Target like they were china. Lila never did like that I could make a dollar stretch. She likes things branded, monogrammed, and posted. I like them paid for. She'd been throwing little sparks all day. Tiny comments about the napkins, the store-brand butter, the sweater I wore from Burlington instead of the boutique she tagged me in last week. But when she went for the wine, she struck a match. I saw Marcus glance at me, that quiet plea in his eyes as if to say, "Mama, let it slide." I almost did. I almost swallowed it with the dry sip that was already burning my throat. But the word cheap clanged around the room like a dropped pan, which is why, when the doorbell rang, I felt relief wash over me like cool water. Marcus jumped up. "I'll get it," he said, but the door had already swung open, and a man in a red jacket peered in with a clipboard. "Delivery for Mrs. Carter," he called, shifting the weight of 2 enormous boxes stacked on a dolly. Behind him another guy wrestled with 3 more. The kids gasped. Lila blinked. I wiped my hands on my apron and said, steady as I could, "Right here." They rolled the boxes to the tree, the artificial one I'd fluffed 3 times, and set them down with dull thuds that sounded, to me, like drum beats. Silence fell so hard, every fork paused midair. The only sound was the squeak of the dolly wheel and Zuri whispering, "Nana, are those for us?" I nodded, but kept my eyes on Lila. She had that thin smile, the one she saves for when she thinks she's in control. "Well," she said, laughing a little, "I guess someone did some last-minute bargain shopping." My brother coughed, like he'd swallowed a bone. Marcus rubbed his forehead. I laced my fingers together to stop them from shaking. There are women who fight by raising their voice. I learned to fight by choosing when to speak, and by doing my math in advance. The first box was taller than my coffee table. The second was long and flat like a promise. I had spent the last 6 months stacking layaway receipts, coupon codes, and overtime hours like bricks, building the kind of Christmas I wished my son had grown up with when money ran thin and landlords ran colder. Inside those boxes, the blue BMX bike Zaire had circled in the catalog, the touchscreen laptop Marcus needed for his night classes, the wool coat Leon kept admiring in the storefront, but wouldn't buy for himself, the mixer Lila pinned 10 times, and for Zuri, the dollhouse with working lights that made her squeal in the aisle back in October. Cheap. I've been called worse, but that one always cuts special. In my mother's house, we stretched Sunday dinner into Tuesday lunch, and no one made jokes about it. Being a black woman in Atlanta means you learn early that your joy is something you lay away. That dignity is sometimes the coupon you clip just to keep the lights on. I birthed Marcus at 19, and learned to iron creases sharp enough to slice doubt in half. I learned to say no to dresses that shimmered, and yes, to tires that wouldn't explode on I-20. I learned the difference between cost and value, and how quiet a house can get when somebody mistakes your discipline for smallness. "The second truck is outside," the delivery man said, handing me a pen. Heads turned like sunflowers. I signed, tipped him with the cash I kept tucked in my apron, and thanked him by name because the tag said E. Johnson. Lila's smile cracked. "A second truck?" she said. "For what, Maya? Dollar store stockings?" I looked at her, pretty as a picture, mean as a rumor, and finally let my voice find the room. "For family," I said. "For things that last." She laughed, but it sounded thin. "You didn't have to do all this," Marcus whispered. "I know," I told him. "I wanted to." The knock came again, louder. like punctuation. Zuri slipped from her chair and pressed her cheek to my hip, eyes shining. "Can we open, Nana?" she breathed. I kissed the top of her head. "One," I said. "We'll open just one." I took the box cutter from the junk drawer, the same little orange one I've had since Marcus was in middle school, and slit the packing tape. Cardboard sighed. Every adult leaned forward. Even the candles seemed to lean. I folded back the flaps and reached in. My fingers touched smooth, lacquered wood. Lila's mouth twitched like she wanted to say something and couldn't find a safe word. "What is it?" Marcus asked. I lifted it slow so she could see first. Her smile dropped clean off, into the silence. When I pulled the first gift from the box, the whole table leaned closer. The wrapping paper shimmered gold, the bow tight and neat, the tag handwritten. To Lila, from Maya. I had wrapped it myself at 2 a.m. the week before, sitting cross-legged on the living room floor with scissors, tape, and the Hallmark channel playing faintly in the background. I set the box on the table in front of her. My daughter-in-law blinked, her lips parting just enough to let out a tiny, skeptical laugh. She probably thought it was a sweater, or maybe one of those candle gift sets you pick up at Walgreens. But when she tugged the ribbon and peeled back the paper, the sound of her gasp filled the room like a church organ. It wasn't a sweater. It wasn't a candle. It was the exact brand name stand mixer she had been saving pictures of on Pinterest, the same one she'd complained Marcus couldn't afford. I'd seen it, noted it, and made it happen. The silence after she unwrapped it was thicker than gravy. Marcus's eyes darted from me to her, then back again. My brother Leon muttered, "Lord, have mercy," under his breath, and the kids bounced in their seats, sensing drama, but not understanding why. You got this?" Lila stammered, her cheeks burning pink against her caramel skin. She looked at Marcus as if waiting for him to say it came from him, like maybe he'd surprised her. But Marcus kept quiet, his jaw working. He knew better. "Yes," I said evenly, folding the paper scraps into neat squares. "I wanted you to have it. You've been baking so much lately. Thought it might make things easier." She stared at me like I had spoken in another language. This isn't cheap," she finally managed, the word cheap sour on her tongue this time. "No," I agreed. "It isn't." The air in the dining room grew heavy, like the moment before a thunderstorm. No one spoke. No one dared. Even the youngest, Zuri, sensed it and whispered to her cousin, "Told you Nana got real presents." Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He loved his wife, but he also knew her sharp tongue could cut deeper than any knife in my kitchen. He looked at me, then at her, like he was standing at a crossroads he didn't want to choose between. Then, just when the silence grew unbearable, the doorbell rang again. Another delivery man appeared, lugging in 2 more boxes. One was long and narrow, the kind of shape you recognize instantly if you've ever seen a child flip through a Christmas catalog. The kids squealed, jumping up and down. "That's mine! That's mine!" Zaire shouted. The man set the boxes by the tree, tipped his cap, and left. The sound of the door clicking shut echoed in the dining room. I picked up the long box and slid it across the table. "Go on, Zaire," I said. He ripped through the wrapping like lightning, his face lighting up as he uncovered the brand-new BMX bike frame, shiny blue with silver accents. He let out a scream that shook the whole house and ran around the table, hugging me so hard I thought my ribs might crack. "Thank you, Nana. Thank you. This is the best Christmas ever." Everyone smiled, even Marcus, but Lila's expression had curdled into something bitter, part embarrassment, part disbelief. Her earlier insult hung in the air, unspoken but heavy. Leon raised his glass. "Well," he said slowly, looking from Lila to me. "Cheap ain't the word I'd use." The table chuckled nervously. Lila forced a smile, but her hands trembled as she smoothed her napkin across her lap. I caught her looking at me sideways, trying to figure out how I had pulled all this off. The truth is, she had no idea how much work it had taken, how many early mornings, double shifts, skipped hair appointments, and coupon codes I'd pieced together like a quilt. But that part of the story wasn't for her. Not yet. For now, I sat tall at the head of my table, my hand steady on my wine glass. The word cheap still rang in my ears, but it was shrinking now, smaller and smaller, drowned out by the sound of children laughing and boxes ripping open. And as I glanced across the table at my daughter-in-law, her cheeks still red, her smile still thin, I thought. She tried to humiliate me, but she forgot one thing. Christmas doesn't belong to her. It belongs to the ones who know how to give. The night was far from over, and the biggest gift hadn't even been opened yet. The doorbell rang again, sharp and urgent this time, cutting through the tension like a knife. Everyone jumped a little, forks clinking against plates, eyes darting toward the hallway. I took my time standing up, smoothing my apron with both hands, as if I'd been expecting it all along. When I opened the door, the cold night air rushed in, carrying the scent of pine and the distant sound of carolers. The delivery man stood there with another dolly stacked high, this time 3 oversized boxes, all wrapped in crisp shipping tape. Behind him, a second man was unloading even more from the truck. "You, Mrs. Carter?" he asked, balancing the clipboard in one hand. "Yes, I am," I said with a smile. "Well, ma'am, Merry Christmas. Got the rest of your order here. You'll need some room." "Bring it on in," I told him, stepping aside. The kids squealed again, running toward the doorway to watch the boxes roll in like a parade. My living room was starting to look like Santa's workshop exploded, and I could feel the shift in the air. Excitement bubbled up in the children. Curiosity tightened in the adults. But Lila, she froze. Her smile had slipped entirely by now. She tried to sip her wine like she wasn't bothered, but I saw her knuckles whiten around the stem of her glass. I didn't miss the way Marcus glanced at her, his brow furrowed, like he was silently telling her to keep it together. The delivery man stacked the last box near the tree and tipped his cap again. "That's the lot, ma'am. Enjoy your holiday." I pressed a folded 20 into his hand. "Thank you, Mr. Williams," I said, reading his tag. His surprise turned into a grin. "Y'all have a blessed night." When I closed the door, the house felt smaller, crowded with cardboard and expectation. Leon chuckled low and long. "Maya, girl, you done turned this place into Macy's." I laughed softly, but my eyes stayed locked on Lila. She was trying to look unfazed, but I could see the storm brewing behind her eyes. She had thrown that word cheap at me like a stone, expecting it to shatter something. But instead, it had ricocheted back, and now the silence she had created was swallowing her whole. I picked up one of the new boxes, smaller but heavier than the rest. "This one's for Marcus," I said, sliding it across the table. He looked startled. "Mama, you didn't—" "Open it," I cut in. He tore the paper carefully, the way he always had since he was a boy, folding it back instead of ripping it. When the box revealed the slim silver laptop he had been saving for, his mouth fell open. "Ma," his voice cracked, deep and heavy with the weight of gratitude he couldn't quite put into words. I leaned over, touching his hand. "You said you wanted to finish your degree. Now you don't have to wait." For a moment, Marcus just stared at me. Then he stood up and hugged me tight, his head bowed against my shoulder like he was a boy again. The kids clapped, Leon whistled, and even Lila let out a nervous laugh, though her eyes flickered with something darker. "That's generous," she said, the words squeezed out like lemon juice. "Yes," I said calmly, meeting her gaze. "It is." The room hummed with an energy I hadn't felt in years. Not just joy, but respect. My family was seeing me differently now. Not just as the mother who scraped by, not just the woman who made miracles out of coupons and leftovers, but as someone who planned, someone who had power. But Lila couldn't let it go. She leaned back in her chair, swirling her wine, and muttered just loud enough, "It's nice, but throwing money around doesn't make up for everything else." The words hit me like a draft of cold air, sharp and chilling. The laughter quieted. Marcus shot her a warning look. Leon raised his eyebrows. The kids, sensing something was wrong, sank back into their chairs. I breathed in deep, steady. I could have snapped back. Lord knows I had every right, but I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I reached for the largest box, the one that had taken me 3 months of overtime to afford. I slid it toward Zuri and whispered, "Go ahead, baby. Open it." She tugged the tape loose, her tiny fingers fumbling until Leon helped her. The cardboard flaps fell open, and when she saw what was inside, she screamed so loud the neighbors probably heard. It was the dollhouse, the one with working lights, miniature furniture, and painted shutters that matched her favorite shade of pink. She jumped into my lap, hugging me with all her little might. "Nana, Nana, it's the one. You got it." Her joy filled the room like music. Tears pricked my eyes, but I blinked them back. Everyone was smiling now. Everyone except Lila. She was quiet. Too quiet. Her wine glass trembling slightly as she set it down on the table. The silence that followed wasn't about awe anymore. It was about her, and she knew it. The living room was overflowing now. Wrapping paper strewn across the floor, boxes stacked like towers, and the sound of kids shouting, laughing, ripping and tearing through cardboard. The tree lights blinked steady, reflecting off shiny paper and tiny ornaments. It was chaos, but it was the kind of chaos that feels alive, that fills a house with something bigger than sound. I sat back in my chair, watching it all unfold, letting the joy of it wash over me. Leon leaned back with his plate, chuckling every few seconds. "Girl, you done turned this into Oprah's Christmas special. You get a gift. You get a gift." Everyone laughed. Everyone except Lila. She sat stiff as stone, her manicured nails tapping against her wine glass, her lips pressed together so tight they nearly disappeared. Every time another gift was opened, I saw her face falter just a little more. Marcus tore into his second box and pulled out a brand new winter coat, sleek and warm, the one he'd eyed in the store but refused to buy because of the price tag. His voice was soft, almost boyish when he said, "Mama, this is the exact one I wanted." Leon slapped him on the back. "See? Your mama knows you better than you know yourself." Zaire jumped up, waving around the basketball he had unwrapped, already bouncing it against the floor despite Lila's sharp, "Not in the house." He ignored her, running straight to me. "Nana, you're the best. I'm gonna make the team with this one, you watch." Zuri was still lost in her dollhouse, carefully setting the furniture just so, humming happily to herself. And then Leon, my brother, opened his long, narrow package. He whistled low when he pulled out the wool coat, deep charcoal with wide lapels. He slipped it on right there in the dining room, standing tall like he was strutting down a runway. "Now look at me. I look like somebody's boss." The whole table erupted in laughter and cheers. He spun once, striking a pose that made the kids howl. Then he leaned down, kissed my cheek, and whispered, "You didn't have to do this, sis, but you did, and I see you." Those words, they cut deep in the best way. I see you. So often, women like me are invisible. We work, we sacrifice, we give, and the world just takes, barely pausing to say thank you. But in that moment I felt seen, not as cheap, not as small, but as someone who mattered. Still, I couldn't ignore the weight of Lila's silence. She hadn't touched her mixer again. Her fork was still on the plate, untouched. She looked around the room, her eyes darting from face to face, searching for an ally, but there were none. Because here's the thing about family. They remember. They remember who lifts them up and who drags them down. They remember kindness as much as they remember cruelty. And every pair of eyes at that table knew she had tried to humiliate me, only to be humbled herself. Finally, she broke the silence. "This is a lot," she said, her voice light but her words sharp. "I just hope we can afford groceries next week." The words landed heavy. Leon gave a low whistle and muttered, "Girl," under his breath. Marcus shut his eyes, pinching the bridge of his nose. The kids froze, looking at me. I didn't flinch. I didn't need to. Instead, I reached for the final box, the one I had been saving for last. Smaller than the others, wrapped in deep blue paper with a silver bow. I placed it in the middle of the table and rested my hand on top. "This," I said slowly, "isn't just a gift. It's something I've been holding on to for a long time." The room went silent again, but not the same silence from before. This one was charged, heavy with curiosity, like everyone was leaning toward me without moving an inch. Even Lila leaned forward despite herself. I untied the bow, peeled back the paper, and opened the lid. Inside was a single envelope. I held it up, letting the soft light from the chandelier catch the gold lettering of Marcus's name. "This," I said, handing it to him, "is the down payment I've been saving for you and your family, for your first house." The room erupted. Gasps, shouts, Zuri clapping her little hands without knowing why. Marcus stood frozen, staring at the envelope as if it might vanish if he blinked too hard. Finally, he looked at me, his eyes wet. "Mama, you deserve a home that's yours," I said, my voice steady but soft. "Something no landlord can take. Somewhere your kids can grow up safe. That's what I've been saving for." Marcus's chest rose and fell like he was trying not to break down in front of everyone. He hugged me again, tighter this time, and for a moment, it felt like the whole world had narrowed to just me and my boy. When I looked up, though, my eyes went straight to Lila. Her face was pale, her mouth slightly open, her hand gripping the edge of the table. She looked like she wanted to speak, but no words came. Because what could she say now? The word she had used earlier, cheap, hung in the air again, but it didn't belong to me anymore. It belonged to her, sitting there small and silent, the only person in the room who couldn't find joy in the moment. And that, right there, was the real gift. As the room buzzed with laughter, torn wrapping paper, and the squeals of children, my mind drifted back to the months, the years, the quiet sacrifices that had built this moment. People see the bow on the box, the shine of the bike, the glow of a dollhouse window. What they don't see is the work that made it possible. And for women like me, especially Black women who've been taught to make do since birth, the real story is never told. Tonight, it was time I told mine, even if only to myself. It started last spring. I was still working part-time at the clinic, filing patient charts and answering phones, when I overheard a nurse talking about her holiday plans. Trips, shopping, matching pajamas. I remember thinking how beautiful it sounded, but also how far away it felt. My grandson Zaire had asked me that same week if Santa could bring him a bike, with real gears like the big kids. Zuri wanted a dollhouse that lights up for real. And Marcus, he didn't even ask. He just sighed over his busted laptop every night, trying to finish assignments for his business degree on a machine that froze every 15 minutes. I went home that night, sat at my kitchen table, and wrote 3 words in the back of my planner: make it happen. From then on, I did everything with Christmas in the back of my mind. I clipped coupons like it was a second job. I cooked big pots of red beans and rice to stretch into 3 dinners instead of 2. I skipped getting my hair pressed my own instead. My coworkers laughed when I brought peanut butter sandwiches for lunch, but they didn't know I was putting the saved money in an envelope marked Carter Christmas. By June, I had a little over $300 saved. By August, $700. By September, I had memorized the layaway dates at Walmart and Target like scripture. And then there were the overtime shifts. The clinic needed help filing after hours, and I volunteered. It meant long nights and aching feet, my eyes burning from staring at the computer screen too long. But each hour added up, and I tucked away every dollar I could. I thought of my mama while I worked. She used to tell me, Maya, dignity is when you choose sacrifice for the ones you love, not when it's forced on you. She raised 4 kids on cleaning jobs, scrubbing floors until her knees went raw, yet we never went hungry, never missed church, never felt less than anybody else. I wanted my grandbabies to feel that same kind of dignity, that even if we couldn't have everything, we could still have joy. But what hit me hardest was Marcus. He had always been proud, never wanting to ask me for anything once he became a man. But I saw the weariness in his shoulders, the way he looked at his kids and wanted more for them. I remembered the little boy he'd been, hungry for sneakers his friends had, embarrassed by secondhand clothes, yet never complaining because he knew I was doing all I could. This Christmas wasn't just about gifts. It was about undoing some of that hunger, some of that shame, even just for one night. So I pushed harder. I started driving Uber on weekends, even when my hands cramped from the wheel. I took surveys online late at night, earned little gift cards and rolled them into bigger savings. I prayed on it too, asking God to stretch every penny the way he stretched loaves and fishes. By November, I had enough for the bike, the dollhouse, the mixer, the coat, the laptop. But the envelope, the down payment, that took everything I had left. Every scrap of energy, every dollar I could carve out of my check. And I'll be real with you, I almost gave up. There were nights when I sat at the kitchen table with bills spread out like a battlefield and thought, why am I doing this? I could have bought something small, simple, and no one would have judged me for it. But then I'd hear Zuri whispering to her dolls, Santa's gonna bring us a house. Or Marcus muttering under his breath about quitting school because his laptop kept crashing. And I knew I couldn't stop. Because here's what Lila didn't understand when she called me cheap. I wasn't just buying things. I was buying moments, memories, proof that even when life tried to strip us bare, we could still shine. And if she couldn't see that, then she didn't understand what it meant to be family. So as I sat there at the head of the table, gifts piled around me, my son holding an envelope he couldn't even process yet, I felt something stir inside me. A quiet strength. A voice saying, "Tell it, Maya. Let them know." I set my fork down, cleared my throat, and said, "You know, none of this came easy." The table fell silent. Even the kids looked up, Zuri pausing with her dollhouse furniture midair. "This year," I continued, my voice steady but heavy, "I worked more hours than I've worked in a long time. I cut corners. I went without, because I wanted y'all to feel loved, not just told. I wanted you to see what I see every time I look at you, that you are worth the sacrifice." Marcus swallowed hard, his eyes shining. Leon nodded slowly, his coat draped proudly across his shoulders. And Lila? She shifted in her seat, uncomfortable. But for once, she didn't have a word to say. Good, because the truth was just getting started. I could feel her eyes on me before I even turned my head. Lila sat there, her face fixed in that thin little smile she wore whenever she wanted to look unbothered. But I knew better. Her nails tapped the side of her wineglass like a metronome, her posture too straight, her smile too tight. I'd seen that smirk before, the same one she used at family cookouts when she compared Marcus's job to her brother's real career, or when she made little comments about the way I decorated my house. That smirk was her armor, and right now, it was the only thing keeping her pride from cracking wide open. "You really went all out this year," she finally said, her tone syrupy sweet but laced with poison. "Guess overtime pays off, huh?" The way she said overtime stung, like my hard work was some dirty little secret she was exposing in front of everyone. Marcus's head snapped toward her, his jaw tightening. "Lila," he warned, his voice low, but I raised my hand gently. "It's all right, baby," I told him, my eyes still on her. "She's not wrong. Overtime did pay off." Her smile faltered for just a second, like she didn't expect me to own it. She leaned back in her chair, sipping her wine, still trying to wear that crown of superiority. I felt a lump rise in my throat, but I swallowed it down, because this wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every time she had sat at this table and made me feel small, every whispered comment, every rolling eye, every time she let her words slice when she thought no one else would notice. "You know, Lila," I said softly, "I might not have the kind of money your folks have. I might not shop at the places you post on Instagram. But what I do have, I earn. And what I give from a place you can't buy. Sacrifice." The room went still. Marcus looked down at his hands, guilt flickering in his eyes because he knew I had been swallowing this for years. Leon's lips pressed together, like he was holding back a clap, or an amen. The kids, sensing the tension, went quiet. Even Zuri stopped fiddling with her dollhouse furniture and crawled up into my lap, leaning her little head against my chest. But Lila, she laughed. Not a belly laugh, not even a real laugh, just a sharp, breathy sound that cut like glass. "Sacrifice," she repeated, shaking her head. "Maya, you make it sound like you're some kind of saint. But really, isn't this all just performance? Buying people's love with big gestures because you want to feel important?" The words hit me like a slap. For a second, I felt my chest cave in, my breath catch. Cheap was one thing, but accusing me of trying to buy love, that was deeper. That was cruel. Marcus stood halfway from his chair, his voice booming this time. "Enough, Lila." But she held up her hands innocently, still smirking. "What?" "I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. Money doesn't make you the hero, and honestly, it looks a little desperate." Desperate. That word made my stomach twist. I looked around the table, my heart pounding, searching for a sign that maybe she wasn't right, that maybe my family didn't see me as some desperate old woman trying to prove her worth with shiny boxes. And then I saw Zaire clutching his new basketball like it was treasure. I saw Leon, still wearing that coat like a badge of pride. I saw Marcus holding the envelope with trembling hands, like it was both a gift and a lifeline, and I knew she was wrong. Still, her smirk gnawed at me. It dragged me back to every moment I had bitten my tongue to keep the peace. Every time I had left her house after Sunday dinner with my jaw clenched and my chest tight. Every time I had reminded myself, "That's your son's wife. Don't make waves." But waves were already crashing now. I took a slow breath, steadying myself. "You think this is desperate?" I asked. my voice low but firm. No, baby girl. Desperate is when a woman tears another woman down just to feel taller. Desperate is when someone can't stand to see joy in a room if she's not the one creating it. Her smirk finally slipped. Just a flicker. But I saw it. The truth had cut her, even if she didn't want to admit it. The silence was thick again, but this time it wasn't awkward. It was heavy with unspoken agreement. The family wasn't with her. They were with me. And for the first time all night, I saw fear in her eyes, because she realized something. Her words no longer held the power. Mine did. It wasn't just tonight. Tonight was only the boiling point. The truth is, Lila and I had been circling each other for years like two boxers in a ring, never throwing a knockout punch but jabbing, waiting for the other to drop her guard. I still remember the first time Marcus brought her home. She was 21, fresh out of college, wearing a blazer so stiff it looked borrowed. Pretty girl, no doubt about it. Light brown skin that glowed, hair slicked back in a perfect bun, and nails sharp enough to slice bread. She shook my hand with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Mrs. Carter," she said, tilting her head. "Marcus has told me so much about you." But something in her tone told me she hadn't liked what she heard. At first, I thought it was just nerves, or maybe me being protective of my only child. But over time, those little things added up. The way she looked around my old house like she was appraising it. The way she corrected Marcus when he said mama instead of mom. The way she always brought up her family, her daddy's business trips, her mama's shopping sprees in Buckhead, like she was trying to remind me of the gap between us. And the thing is, she never had to do that. I already knew the gap was there. Her family had money, status, the kind of ease mine never did. But what I couldn't stand was the way she wielded it, not to lift Marcus up, but to remind him and me of what she thought we lacked. The first real crack came at Thanksgiving 2 years ago. I had made my collard greens the way I always did. Smoked turkey, slow simmered, tender enough to melt on the tongue. Everybody had a second helping except her. She pushed them around her plate, then finally said, "Oh, I don't usually eat greens cooked this way. My mom says it's a little heavy." That was her favorite word for anything I did. Heavy, old-fashioned, too much. Marcus scolded her later. I know he did, but she never apologized. She never even looked embarrassed. Then came last summer, Zuri's 5th birthday. I had bought the cake myself, a big strawberry shortcake from Publix, with her name written in pink frosting. When I set it down, Zuri squealed with joy, but Lila leaned over to Marcus and whispered, "Next year, we should order from that boutique bakery. The pictures would look better." I heard her. I always heard her. The final straw, though, wasn't even about me. It was about Marcus. He had been working 2 jobs, trying to save for school, and one night he came home bone-tired, his shirt soaked through from working late at the warehouse. Lila took one look at him and said, "Marcus, this isn't sustainable. You're burning yourself out for, what, a degree from a state school? My brother didn't even finish, and he's already making 6 figures. Oh," when he told me that, his voice was flat, like he was trying not to feel it. I wanted to scream. My son, the boy who grew up watching me stretch pennies like rubber bands, deserved a wife who believed in him, not one who made him question his worth. But I bit my tongue, for his sake. That's the thing about being a mama. You'll swallow 1,000 insults if it means your child doesn't have to choose sides. Until tonight. Tonight, she called me cheap in front of my family, my grandchildren, my son. She thought it would land like a dagger, sharp and final, but instead, it landed like a match. It lit every buried memory, every little jab I had tucked away, every roll of her eyes, every smirk. And now, I wasn't biting my tongue anymore. I looked across the table at her, still sitting rigid with that smile plastered on, and said quietly, "You know, Lila, I've put up with a lot from you over the years." Marcus stiffened. "Mama," he started, but I raised a hand. "No, it's time this is said." Her eyebrows arched, but she didn't speak. "You've rolled your eyes at my food, my house, my clothes. You've whispered about what I don't have, and you thought I didn't notice." I leaned forward, my voice low but firm. "But let me tell you something. Every time you tried to make me feel small, it only reminded me how much bigger I've had to be to survive in this world." The silence after that was thick, heavy. For the first time in all the years I'd known her, Lila had no smirk, no quick comeback, just a flush rising on her cheeks, and her eyes darting anywhere but at mine, because the truth had finally landed where it belonged, right in her lap. And this time, I wasn't letting her wriggle free. That word, cheap, it kept echoing in my head, not because it was true, but because I knew how deep those kinds of words could cut. People think they're just insults, something said in the heat of the moment. But when you've spent your whole life trying to hold your dignity together with scraps and grit, words like that aren't just sharp. They're heavy. They carry weight. I'd been called worse. When I was a little girl, growing up in my mama's shotgun house in Macon, the kids at school used to tease me for wearing the same 2 dresses in rotation. "You poor," they'd chant, tugging at my faded sleeves. I learned real quick how to sew a button, patch a tear, and walk with my chin high even when my shoes had holes in the soles. My mama used to tell me, "Baby, they can call you poor, but they can't call you worthless, unless you start believing them." That stayed with me. But being called cheap was different. Cheap meant not good enough. Cheap meant disposable. Cheap meant your efforts didn't matter, no matter how much heart you put into them. And I'd been fighting that shadow my whole life. When Marcus was little, I couldn't afford the Jordans he wanted, so I saved up and bought him a pair of knockoffs from Payless. He wore them to school once and came home with his head hanging low. "They laughed at me, Mama," he said, his little voice breaking. "They said my shoes were fake." I hugged him tight that night and told him, "Son, those shoes might be cheap, but you're not. You walk proud in them, 'cause your mama worked for every penny to get 'em." But still, I saw the shame in his eyes. I saw how he walked slower the next morning, trying not to be noticed, and I carried that pain with me, every day after. Even as a grown woman, it followed me. The coworkers who wrinkled their noses when I brought lunch in a reused Cool Whip container. The cashier who looked surprised when I pulled out exact change in coupons, like being frugal was a joke. The landlords who treated me like I should be grateful just to have a roof. Every time that same word rang in the back of my mind. Cheap. So when Lila spatted at me across my own table, in front of my family, it wasn't just disrespect. It was a reopening of every old wound. But here's the thing. Pride is funny. It'll make you break your own back just to prove you're standing tall. And sometimes, that pride becomes a shield. I thought about the nights I went without so Marcus could eat seconds. I thought about how I skipped new glasses for 3 years straight because the kids needed school supplies. I thought about how I wore the same black coat winter after winter until the sleeves frayed and the zipper broke, all because I refused to let my son grow up with nothing. Was that cheap? No. That was sacrifice. That was survival. That was love turned into labor. The price of pride wasn't just money. It was years of bending, stretching, and grinding, so nobody could ever look at my child and say he was less. And now, sitting there in my own dining room with gifts piled high around us, I realized something. The word didn't belong to me anymore. Cheap wasn't who I was. Cheap was what people called me when they couldn't understand the strength it took to make something out of nothing. I lifted my glass of wine, the one she had mocked earlier, and said, "You called me cheap, Lila." And maybe I was, once, by the world's standards. But cheap doesn't get you here. Cheap doesn't buy your daughter her dream dollhouse, or your husband the tools he needs for his degree. Cheap doesn't stack up enough savings for a down payment on a house. No, baby girl. Cheap couldn't do what I did. Her lips parted like she wanted to argue, but no sound came. The table was silent, every eye on me. Even the kids, who didn't fully understand, sat wide-eyed, sensing something important was happening. Marcus set the envelope down gently, his hand resting on top of it like it was holy. "Mama's right," he said quietly, his voice heavy with emotion. "Nothing about her has ever been cheap." Leon raised his glass too, his deep voice rumbling. "To Maya." "To Nana," Zuri squealed, raising her juice. "To Nana," Zaire echoed, clutching his basketball. Even Marcus lifted his wineglass high, his gaze burning into Lila's, daring her to say otherwise. And just like that, the word that had once stung like a slap was gone, replaced, erased, not cheap, never cheap, priceless. The pile of wrapping paper on the floor had grown into a mountain, but the energy around the table wasn't just about gifts anymore. It was about truth. Every box that had been opened carried more than a present. It carried a reminder of everything I had done, everything I had carried, everything that had been dismissed for too long. Zuri sat cradling her dollhouse furniture, her little face glowing with joy. "Nana listens," she said matter-of-factly, as if it was the simplest thing in the world. "I told her I wanted this months ago, and she remembered." The words were innocent, but the silence that followed was anything but. Marcus's eyes flicked to Lila, who was suddenly very interested in her wine glass again. Leon let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. "Out of the mouths of babes," he said, raising his fork. Zaire, bouncing his basketball lightly on his knee, added, "Yeah, Nana always listens. She don't forget nothing." That cut deeper than they realized. Because wasn't that the truth? I remembered every little thing they said, even in passing. I had built Christmas out of their wishes, piece by piece, like a quilt stitched from scraps of conversation. Meanwhile, Lila, my daughter-in-law, their mother, was always too busy, too distracted, too wrapped up in how things looked instead of how they felt. The truth was unwrapping itself right alongside the gifts. Marcus slid his laptop back into its box, still shaking his head. "I don't even know what to say, Mama. I didn't ask for this. You didn't have to." "I know," I cut him off gently, "but I wanted to. Because you deserve more than working yourself into the ground. You deserve a chance to dream again." His throat worked, and his eyes glistened. He looked at me like he did when he was 10, standing at the kitchen table with a math test he thought he'd failed, waiting for me to tell him it was going to be okay. Only this time, he was a grown man, carrying the weight of his own family, and realizing his mama still had his back. Leon leaned forward, his new coat draped across his shoulders. "You know, Maya," he said slowly, "folks don't always give flowers while we can still smell 'em. But tonight I'ma say it plain. You've held this family together more times than any of us will ever know, and you did it without complaining, without ever making us feel the lack. That ain't cheap. That's love." The table murmured in agreement. Even the kids nodded, though they didn't fully understand. Lila finally spoke, her voice thin. "Okay, but let's not act like money fixes everything. Gifts don't replace respect." I finished for her, my voice sharp now. "You're right. Gifts don't replace respect. And for years I've let you disrespect me in little ways, thinking it wasn't worth stirring up trouble. But tonight, in my house, at my table, no, not anymore." Marcus's head snapped toward me, alarmed, but I didn't stop. "You think it's about the gifts. It's not. It's about listening. It's about seeing what people need and finding a way to give it, even if it costs you. That's family. That's what I've always done. And the fact that you can't see that, that's the real cheap thing in this room." The words landed hard. For a moment, Lila just stared at me, her face pale, her smirk gone, her fingers twisted in her napkin, searching for something to hold on to. But the truth had already unwrapped itself, and everyone saw it. Marcus let out a slow breath, his hand covering his mouth. Leon muttered, "Well, there it is." The kids went back to their toys, unfazed, as if they already knew where the real love came from. And me? I sat taller than I had in years. Because sometimes the greatest gift you can give isn't a bike, or a coat, or even a down payment. Sometimes, the greatest gift is the truth. The hum of voices and paper tearing had faded into a heavy stillness. Even the kids, lost in their toys, seemed quieter than usual, like they could sense something important was about to happen. I could feel the weight of every eye in that room, some expectant, some nervous, some already knowing. This was it, the moment I had been swallowing for years. I set down my glass, folded my napkin, and looked straight at Lila. "You know," I said calmly, "for a long time, I kept my mouth shut, because I didn't want Marcus stuck between us, because I didn't want to be the cause of tension in his marriage. But tonight, you crossed a line." She froze, her lips parting just slightly, as if she wasn't sure whether to fight back or stay silent. "You called me cheap," I continued, my voice even but strong. "And you thought that word was going to embarrass me. You thought it would put me in my place." I leaned forward, my hands flat on the table. "But what you don't understand is this. Everything I have, I've earned. Every single thing. And I earned it while carrying my son on one hip and the weight of the world on the other. So if you want to talk about cheap, let's talk about cheap." Marcus shifted uncomfortably, but he didn't interrupt. Leon sat back, arms folded, nodding slowly like he was waiting for me to preach. Cheap is taking for granted the meals that land on your table, without ever asking what it took to put them there. Cheap is rolling your eyes at traditions you didn't have to lift a finger to create. Cheap is standing in another woman's home, at her table, and disrespecting her in front of her family. That's cheap. My voice rose now, not in a shout, but in the kind of steady power that fills a room. Do I stretch my dollars? Yes. Do I cut corners so the people I love don't have to? Yes. But I'll tell you what I've never been. Ungrateful. And I'll tell you what I've never raised Marcus to be. Ashamed of where he came from. You don't get to rewrite that. The silence was thick as molasses. Lila's cheeks burned red, her mouth opening and closing like she wanted to argue, but nothing came out. She stared at the table, her smirk completely gone, her pride stripped bare in front of everyone. And then Marcus spoke. "Mama's right," he said, his voice low but steady. "She's always been right. Everything I am, everything I have, is because of her. You don't get to belittle that, Lila. Not in this house, not ever again." The words hit the table like a gavel. Leon raised his glass. Well, amen to that. The kids, not understanding the full weight of what had just happened, clapped their hands anyway, their laughter bubbling up and easing some of the tension. But the truth hung in the air, undeniable. The turning point had come. For years, Lila had been the one with the sharper tongue, the one who thought she had the upper hand with her education, her family's money, her polished ways. But tonight, she had been unmasked. Tonight, in front of everyone, she realized that no matter how many times she rolled her eyes, no matter how many digs she took, she couldn't erase me. And I realized something too. I didn't need her approval. I never did. I had my son. I had my grandchildren. I had my brother. And most importantly, I had the knowledge that every sacrifice I ever made had built this moment. A moment where truth stood taller than pride, where love outshined insult. I lifted my glass one last time. "To family," I said. "The real kind, the kind that lifts you up, not tears you down." Glasses clinked around the table. Marcus raised his high, his eyes locked on mine. Zuri shouted, "To Nana!" Again, her little voice ringing like a bell. And Lila? She stayed quiet, her glass untouched, her face tight, because she knew. The turning point had come, and nothing would ever be the same. The toast echoed in the room, the clinking of glasses sharp against the thick silence that followed. Everyone had joined in, except Lila. Her glass sat untouched, her hand resting stiffly on the stem, her face frozen in a mask of strained composure. But masks only last so long. Her cheeks burned crimson, the flush climbing her neck. She pressed her lips together, but I could see the tremble there. Her eyes darted around the table, looking for an ally, someone to bail her out, to laugh, to change the subject. But none came. Even the kids, who normally filled every silence with chatter, stayed still. Zuri tilted her head, her tiny voice breaking the tension. "Mama, why you not saying cheers?" The question was innocent, but it hit harder than any accusation. Marcus's head whipped toward Lila, his expression sharp. "Answer her," he said quietly. Lila's throat worked, but no sound came. She picked up her glass finally, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace. "Cheers," she muttered, barely audible, before setting it back down without drinking. Leon leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed, watching her like a man who'd seen this kind of pride before. "Funny thing about words," he drawled. "They don't never leave the room. Once you say 'em, they hang there. Can't snatch 'em back." Her eyes flicked to him, then quickly away. She picked at her napkin, folding and unfolding it, her jaw tight. The embarrassment was settling in now, heavy as a winter blanket. You could see it in the way she couldn't meet my gaze, in the way her smile had completely deserted her. She was unraveling, piece by piece, and for the first time since I'd known her, she didn't have a single comeback. Marcus leaned forward, his elbows on the table. "Do you even realize what you did tonight?" His voice was calm, but it carried steel underneath. Lila started, then faltered. "I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did," he cut in, his tone firm. "You've been doing this for years, Lila. Little comments, little digs. I let it slide because I didn't want to start fights. But you disrespected my mother in her own home. On Christmas." The room was dead quiet. The only sound was the faint hum of the heater kicking on. Tears welled in her eyes then, though she blinked hard to keep them from falling. She hated looking weak. It was written all over her. But the weight of the moment, the weight of her own words, pressed down on her until she couldn't hold it back anymore. Her voice cracked. She cleared her throat, tried again. I just feel like I can't measure up. Like no matter what I do, I'll never be enough. The admission stunned the room. For a second, even I sat back, surprised. That wasn't the voice of a woman smirking. That was the voice of someone cracked open. But Marcus wasn't moved. "And tearing her down makes you feel better?" he asked, his tone sharp. She shook her head quickly, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. No, it's not that. I don't know. I thought if I said it first, nobody would see how insecure I am." The words tumbled out, messy, broken. And for the first time, I saw her not as my critic, not as my enemy, but as a scared little girl hiding behind her smirk. But still, the sting remained. I folded my hands in front of me, my voice calm. "Insecurity doesn't excuse disrespect, Lila. We all got our struggles. But when you choose to cut someone down instead of lifting them up, that's on you." She nodded quickly, wiping her cheeks, her shoulders shaking. The embarrassment wasn't just about being called out. It was about being exposed. The armor she wore every day had cracked, and there was no hiding now. Marcus sat back, his jaw tight. "You owe my mama an apology." The whole table waited. Finally, with her face wet and her voice trembling, she whispered, "I'm sorry." The words hung there, fragile but real. I nodded slowly, not smiling, not letting her off the hook too easy. "Thank you," I said simply, because forgiveness, like respect, has to be earned, and she wasn't there yet. The plates were cleared, the last of the ham wrapped in foil, and the kids had scattered to the living room floor with their toys. The house hummed with that warm, post-dinner energy, but underneath it ran something sharper. Whispers, side glances, quiet conversations carried just out of earshot of the dining table. I stood at the sink, rinsing dishes, when I caught the first one. Leon's voice, low and steady, drifting from the corner of the kitchen. "She finally showed her true colors," he muttered to Marcus, who leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "I've been biting my tongue for years, watching the way she talks to your mama. I wanted to say something, but it wasn't my place." Marcus rubbed his temples. "You think I didn't notice? I noticed. I just kept hoping she'd change, that it was just her nerves or her way of, I don't know. But tonight," his voice trailed off. Leon clapped him on the shoulder. "You can love a woman, nephew, but don't let that love blind you to how she treats your family, 'cause the way she treats your mama, that's the way she'll treat you when life gets hard." I turned the faucet down, listening though they didn't know I could hear. Marcus didn't answer right away, but his silence said enough. In the dining room, Zair's laughter rang out as he bounced his basketball gently against the carpet. But under it, I caught another whisper. Two of my nieces huddled by the doorway. "Did you see her face when Auntie called her out?" One whispered, barely containing her giggle. "Girl, she looked like she wanted to sink under the table," the other replied. "And about time. She always acting like she's better than everybody else." They both snickered before quieting when Lila walked past, her face blotchy from crying. She slipped into the hallway, heading upstairs, her heels clicking against the wood. The girls fell silent, watching her disappear, then exchanged a look that said everything. I dried my hands and turned, catching Marcus's eye. He sighed. "She's embarrassed," he said softly. "I don't think she expected to get called out like that, especially not by me." "And by her own reflection," Leon added, shaking his head. "That woman finally saw herself tonight, and Lord knows, she didn't like the picture." Later, when I stepped into the living room, Zuri was perched in her dollhouse world, whispering to herself. I leaned down to kiss her curls, and I heard her tiny voice say, "Mama was mean to Nana. Mama gotta be nice now. Children don't lie. They feel the truth before adults ever admit it." I sat back in my chair, the house still buzzing with whispers, and realized something important. Tonight wasn't just about defending myself. It was about shifting the way the whole family saw things. They had all witnessed the same moment. They had all seen the mask slip, and they would all carry that memory forward. Whispers in the kitchen, giggles in the doorway, even the quiet thoughts in Marcus's heart. Lila's words had planted themselves in every corner of this house, and no matter what happened next, no matter how hard she tried to plaster over it, she could never take them back. Respect is funny that way. It takes years to build and seconds to lose. And tonight, she lost it. By the time dessert hit the table, pecan pie and peach cobbler, the energy in the house had shifted completely. It used to be that whenever Lila entered a room, people tensed, not out of respect, but out of caution. She had a way of making folks feel judged, like one wrong word would be picked apart later. And whether folks admitted it or not, she carried herself like the center of gravity in Marcus's household. But tonight, that center had cracked. She came back downstairs eventually, her eyes red, but her makeup touched up. She slid quietly into her chair, hoping maybe the kids' laughter and the hum of chatter would cover the awkwardness. But it didn't. Something had changed. The kids didn't run to her first. They ran to me, tugging on my apron, showing me their toys, asking me to watch their games. Leon asked me to cut him an extra slice of pie. My nieces gathered around me with their plates, laughing and swapping stories, as if I were the sun they were orbiting. And Marcus stayed close to me. He pulled his chair nearer, his hand brushing mine when I passed him his dessert. He kept looking at me like he was seeing me for the first time, not just as Mama, but as the anchor of the family, the one who had always been steady, always been there. Lila noticed. She tried to chime in a few times. "That cobbler looks amazing," she said, smiling too wide. "Maya, where did you buy it?" "I didn't buy it," I replied smoothly, not missing a beat. "I baked it." "Oh," she said, her smile faltering. "Of course." Later, when Zaire proudly showed off the bike frame to the cousins, she clapped her hands and said, "Wow, that's so exciting, baby. You'll have to thank Daddy for putting it together." But Zaire shook his head quickly. "I'm thanking Nana. She got it for me." The words hit her like a slap. I saw the flicker in her eyes, the way her smile froze, the way her throat bobbed as she swallowed it down. Because here's the truth. Kids know who gives from the heart. And no amount of Instagram-perfect birthday parties or boutique outfits can cover that. The family's loyalty had shifted. It wasn't loud. Nobody made speeches or declared sides. But it was in the way they leaned toward me, the way they echoed my words, the way they looked at me with something deeper than gratitude, respect. And respect is the kind of currency you can't fake. Lila tried to recover. She leaned toward Marcus, her voice low, but I caught it. "They're all looking at your mother like she hung the moon. Doesn't that bother you?" Marcus turned his head slowly, his eyes narrowing. "No, it makes me proud. Because she did hang the moon, Lila. You just never wanted to admit it." Her face fell, and she sat back in her chair, quiet. For the rest of the evening, she didn't smirk, didn't roll her eyes, didn't make another comment. She just sat there, watching the laughter, the chatter, the togetherness, all of it swirling around me, not her. And for the first time, she realized she wasn't the center anymore. She was the outsider at the table, and I was the one everyone was turning toward. The power had shifted, not because I asked for it, not because I demanded it, but because love and sacrifice will always outweigh pride and pretense. And Lila had nothing left to lean on but her silence. For the first time in years, I felt light. Not because everything was perfect, far from it, but because the weight I'd been carrying, the silence I'd swallowed, was gone. The words had finally been spoken, the truth laid bare, and the family had chosen. Not sides, not drama, but respect. I sat back in my chair, the soft glow of the Christmas tree reflecting in my wine glass, and let the laughter of my grandbabies wash over me. Zuri was crouched beside her dollhouse, carefully arranging miniature plates on the tiny table. Zaire was bouncing his basketball softly, pretending to shoot hoops into the air vent. Leon had loosened his belt, leaning back with a satisfied groan, humming an old Sam Cooke tune under his breath. The house felt alive, and for once, I didn't feel the need to rush, to serve, to fix. I could just be. Marcus leaned over, his voice low so only I could hear. "Mama, I don't think I've ever told you enough. Thank you. For all of it. For everything you've ever done. Tonight just reminded me. None of this family works without you. Tears pricked my eyes, but I blinked them back. I squeezed his hand, my voice steady. That's what a mama's for, to make sure her children stand taller than she ever did. He nodded, his eyes wet. For the first time since he was a boy, he let his head rest against my shoulder, just for a moment. And in that moment, I knew, whatever storms came, whatever fights lay ahead between him and Lila, he would always carry my lessons inside him. The gifts weren't just toys or gadgets. They were symbols, proof that love, when backed by sacrifice, leaves a mark deeper than pride. I stood and walked to the tree, running my fingers along the tinsel, the ornaments my mama had given me decades ago. One of them, a glass angel with a cracked wing, caught the light. I remembered her words. Dignity is when you choose sacrifice for the ones you love. Tonight, I felt her in the room. I turned back to the family, smiling. All right, y'all, I said, clapping my hands. Who's ready for cobbler and some Christmas music? The kids cheered. Leon hollered, Now you talking? Marcus laughed, shaking his head. Even Lila forced a small smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. She stayed quiet, her fork sliding through her pie, her presence shrinking in the glow of the room. For once, she wasn't the center of attention. She was just another person at the table. And me? I was free. I carried no bitterness, no weight of proving myself, because I didn't need to anymore. The truth was already carved into this night, into their memories. Years from now, they wouldn't remember her smirk. They'd remember the bike, the dollhouse, the laughter, the down payment envelope. They'd remember the night Nana turned cheap into priceless. I poured myself another glass of wine, my cheap bottle, still tasting just fine, and raised it high. To Christmas, I said. To Christmas, the family echoed back. The music started playing. Temptations' Silent Night, spinning low on the record player. And I let myself sway in the middle of my own living room. Zuri clinging to my leg, Zaire bouncing in rhythm, Leon snapping along. It wasn't the Christmas Lila had envisioned, with polished pictures and boutique everything. It was better. It was ours. And I had reclaimed it. Long after the cobbler was eaten and the kids had fallen asleep on the couch, the house was quiet again. The tree lights blinked softly in the corner, their reflection glowing in the window. I sat there in the stillness, the night's weight finally settling into me, and I thought about everything that had unfolded. It started with one word: cheap. A word meant to slice me open, to humiliate me in front of the people I love. But instead, that word became a mirror, and not for me, for her. Because here's the truth. I had spent my whole life stretching dollars, working overtime, clipping coupons, and building joy out of scraps. And yes, maybe the world had called me cheap once or twice, but in the end, I knew what mattered. I knew that dignity wasn't about what you had in your wallet. It was about what you gave with your heart. And that was what my family saw tonight. Marcus had held me like he hadn't in years, finally understanding the sacrifices I'd carried for him. Leon had spoken the words I'd needed to hear for decades, that I was the glue holding us together. The kids, without even realizing it, had called the truth out plain. Nana listens, Nana remembers. That's not cheap. That's priceless. And Lila, well, she had been humbled. I don't know if she'll change. I don't know if she'll ever truly respect me the way she should. But I do know this. She can't undo what happened tonight. She can't erase the silence that fell when her words bounced back on her. She can't unhear her own children say that I listen, I remember, I give. That will stay with her. And it will stay with me too. Because tonight wasn't just about defending myself. It was about reclaiming my dignity, right there in the middle of Christmas dinner, with nothing more than the truth and the love I had already given. I leaned back in my chair, whispering to myself, Mama, I hope you're proud. I felt her there with me. The woman who taught me sacrifice was a kind of love, who taught me never to let anyone make me feel small for surviving. This story isn't just mine. It belongs to every woman who's ever been told she's too much, or not enough. Every mama who worked 2 jobs so her kids could have 1 gift under the tree. Every grandmother who made do with less, so her family could have more. Every black woman who's ever carried the weight of respect on her back and dared the world to call her cheap. So let me leave y'all with this. Respect doesn't come from the price tag. It comes from the sacrifice. And sometimes the best clapback you'll ever give is not with your mouth, but with the life you build. the love you give, and the family who knows your worth even when others try to dim it. So I'll ask you, have you ever been called cheap, less than, or not enough? Did you swallow it? Did you let it sting? Or did you, like me, find a way to turn that insult into a moment of truth? Because if you've ever stretched $1, worked yourself bone-tired, or sacrificed your own comfort to make sure your family had joy, you already know. You're not cheap. You're priceless. And don't let anybody at any table tell you different.